got that loaded? Yeah. Thank you, Alex. Good evening, everybody. So thankful for you. I was trying to figure out when Rick welcomed us and thanked everybody for being here on Tuesday, how would we know if someone didn't get the memo that we moved? Kind of a raise your hand if you're not here thing. But we're thankful you remembered and thankful you are here. And we're thankful to share together. Good crowd. And we're thankful for each and every one of you. Remember our assignment over the past several months, looking forward, trying to figure out who is it that God, when He's entrusted me with this son, this daughter, these sons or daughters, who is it that we want them to be based on God's instruction, God's vision for them? What are we aiming them toward? And we'll take that into consideration and let you do something with that in the future. Let's pick back up from last week. And to do so, I want to use this to open. When I was looking into the opening for Sunday morning sermon, when we ended up talking about geese or ducks flying in that flying V and togetherness, I had originally went down the path of these Iditarod races and how these dogs work together. But I ran across a video with the world record holder Musher. Okay, that's him on the back there, Mitch Seavey, and his comments about the training process for these Iditarod dogs fit extremely closely with so many things we've talked about and are in the midst of talking about that I said, well, we need to move this to Wednesday night, and let's talk about this as an opening illustration to dive into talking about obedience and training and discipline and all those things. So just listen to some of the things that come up. Just a reminder, if you're not familiar, the Iditarod is a race across a section of Alaska. It kind of cuts off a good portion of the whole state of Alaska, 938 miles, so almost 1,000 miles. It goes from Anchorage to Nome, Alaska. It's in March. It's not a warm time of year in Alaska, as you can imagine, so they will race through blizzards. There'll be whiteout conditions where they can't see, sub-zero temperatures, gale force winds. Oftentimes the wind chill can reach as low as negative 100 degrees Fahrenheit. When the race first started in 1973, it took them almost 22 days to complete, and the goal for most was survival. Okay, there's actually a minimum of dogs that must survive in order for you to qualify if you finish. Like, you can't just finish with 2 dogs and say, hey, I finished. You have to complete it with so many dogs alive. That was the initial goal, was this is so rough and so difficult, we just got to survive. 22 days was the original winning time. Now, the world record holder did it in just a little over 8 days. And so in that time frame of a few decades, they've trimmed it down, and now they're at the peak of just performance and endurance. Here's what he says. The Musher himself says, everything we accomplish, whether it's in a single run that we just do for enjoyment or for training, or if it's in the big races, it's all about the relationship between the Musher and the dogs. It's all about a relationship between me and them. So the counselor interviewing him says, well, how do you build trust and confidence? Here's his answer. We build it through example. Every experience they have with me is a trustworthy experience. He said, everything we do, every minute we spend together is building trust. If it's something I do that undermines trust, then it affects our performance. So the counselor asked him, okay, well, tell me when does it start? And he says, he laughed, and he said, it literally starts the day they are born. We begin to aim them toward 8 days across the state of Alaska in extreme conditions. We start aiming them for that accomplishment the day they are born. The counselor asked, how do you differentiate and walk the fine line between needing to push them and being corrective, and also needing to be positive and reinforcing without going to either extreme? So how do you correct? How do you be positive, but neither in an extreme? And he said we have to keep the environment as positive as possible. But then he said this, it's also not possible to train them to the greatest success if everything is positive. there have to be boundaries. Correction is absolutely needed. He said, but in the absence of positive environment, the negative will not work. So as we think about tonight, we're going to transition from day-to-day living into corrected discipline, Lord willing. Just think about that. Without an environment of it largely positive, nurturing trust, the negative will not work. And then he goes on and says it doesn't have to be an extreme, violent negative. It doesn't have to be slapping them or striking them. It might just be first pulling back on some of the positives, hoping they learn quickly. So there's a wide range of that negative correction. It's not always just extreme in our minds. He says this, though, they are most comfortable and thus teachable and trainable when they know they are within the proper boundaries. Counselor asks follows that up and says, when they, the dogs, or in our instances, people, when they violate the boundaries, they are actually thankful that someone loves them enough to bring them back to where they need to be. He asks, how do you push them to go from puppy to running a 1,000-mile race? And that's over the course of 3 to 4 years. That's about how old they are when they run these races. And he says by the time they reach the A team, the first team there, he said they think they are Superman. They think they can accomplish anything we push them to do. And so he says we do that intentionally with incredibly challenging demands, but also increasingly higher positive reinforcement. And so they have this discussion back and forth. For them, each step feels like a strain and a struggle. I don't know that I can do this. You can just tell they're panting. They're wanting to give up, but they push them to finish. And then it's a light bulb moment after they finish that stretch of challenge where they realize, oh, I do have the capacity. I can do this. And it's that constant process of realization that comes by that positive environment, but with the challenges and correction and pushing. And remember, that will also build the trust between musher and dog. They know he's going to push them, but they also know he's not going to kill them or let them hurt too much. He's not going to abuse the relationship. He's not going to be selfish in the relationship. And he says this, on the day we line up for the Iditarod, he's confident. He's confident that they would throw themselves off of a cliff because they think I will catch them. He said that's how they know they're trained or not, is do they trust me enough that day? And those were his words. And the counselor closed and said that he rode with them for a stretch on the sled with the dogs. And he said, here I am thinking about discipline and endurance and struggle and challenge and all this. And he said, when I was riding, I could look at those dogs and just the look on their faces between each other, and when they would occasionally look back at the musher, was pure joy. They loved what they were doing. It's because the environment of the musher was that of love and trust and dependence, reinforcing boundaries that build trust, and that they learned through that they could accomplish something that was demanding but very rewarding. So what are your thoughts about that and what we've been talking about with parenting, raising and training children? You see a lot of overlap? We could hear the goal of raising a faithful child into a faithful adult and think, how's that possible? That's impossible today. We hope it works. We hope this does good. We hope that does good, but I don't know what to do. I don't know if it's possible. Just as though some people would say, you can't get dogs to work together and go across the state of Alaska in 8 days. But with the proper humility that leads to these boundaries and this strategy and love and trust and knowing when to push and when to pull back and when to comfort and when to be positive and when to correct, all of those things yield an environment of success and ultimately that of joy and harmony, all coming out of a healthy relationship. All right? So what thoughts do you have from that? Right, that's good. Yeah, the home needs to represent those same features, right? We're all on the same team trying to get to the same place, please the same God. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. Yes. That's good. Yeah. Right. Right. Very good.
Sense of trust too. The dogs can take a guy right off the cliff, so
Yeah.
he's got to trust them.
That's right. That's good. Yes. It's mutual trust. Right. Absolutely. Very good. All right. So we've asked the question, how do we know when someone is trained? Something is trained. We're training up. And as long as they are within our realm of responsibility, as long as they are within our home, we have an opportunity to train them in the right direction. That's akin to bringing them up. In Ephesians 6 and verse 4, we want to see them grown up into a state of maturity. We're bringing them up, not in isolation, not from a distance, but alongside them, nourishing them such that they grow as they are designed to grow. Those are the questions that we've been using over the past couple of weeks. The two things, the two arenas that he says, the two directions within the arena of the Lord that he says to do that in Ephesians 6 and verse 4 is discipline or nurture or training, but also instruction, sometimes admonition and correction. All right? You've got both positive and negative aspects of both of those, okay? And instead of trying to break it down as I've got there, we tried to shift our thinking a little bit to illustrate last week with this chart. You spend a given hour outside playing with your child, and you could do several things in that hour. And this is just kind of made up times, but just to show the purpose of, or the process of how we spend our time. For the most part, the bulk of our time is going to be whatever it is we're out there doing. We're playing a game, we're tossing the ball, we're teaching that sport, whatever it is. We're telling stories, we're laughing, we're having fun, they're playing in the leaves. That whatever we're doing, we may not know it all the time, but that is a process of training. It's training them to stay in the right place, to do the right things, to be with us, all that. There's also going to be times where we say, let's do this. Let's run to this place. Let's stay over here. Let's throw it this way. We're giving commands, and those commands have a specific purpose, but they also have a larger purpose that keeps them safe. We're going to have to take some time to give some negative commands. Stop, you're getting too close to the road. Don't go there, don't do this. Those will be necessary, but they shouldn't and probably won't be the bulk of our time. Now, in the case that they step too close to the road, they violate our boundaries, or they go in the road, see, we may have to enact a consequence. That shouldn't be the bulk of our time. That shouldn't be the whole thing we're doing if we're out there playing in the yard. But it very well may have a role. Likewise, the whole picture of discipline and instruction of the Lord contains all of those qualities. The bulk of it is our day-to-day living and our own faithfulness. Okay? That's the bulk of discipline and instruction of the Lord. But also, in addition to that, there are also necessary times of positive commands, positive instruction. Do this. Here's why we do this. Come with us, that kind of thinking. There's also a time to give some negative commands. Don't do this. Stay away from this. We're not going to do this for this reason. And then there is a sliver of time that's necessary, but it's not all of parenting, where we correct and we allow consequences to take place when instruction and thus boundaries are violated. And I think this holistic approach is just so important because we get overwhelmed with parenting. We see kind of the missteps of our children. Maybe we see our own missteps, and we magnify some of the difficult things. And we pretend that 80% of that graph is correction and punishment and consequences, when that's not all parenting is. And the better we do it, the more consistently we do it all, the smaller that sliver should get. The idea is, let's be sure we're seeing that discipline and instruction of the Lord involves several different directions. And I'm not doing this to be overly precise, okay? Don't sit out and make a time graph for your own life, but just think everything we're doing with them is discipline and instruction. Am I making sure that those are of the Lord, okay? So let's talk about questions or comments about that. I was a little concerned how clear this was last week, and I had one dad tell me within the past week that it was really cool, really helpful. So I was glad to hear that it was. Anybody else chime in? Helpful at all? All right, let's talk about day-to-day living and faithfulness. How does that train, how does that discipline them in the Lord? First of all, think about routines. How do routines train, instruct our children? Okay. All the routines you're saying? Okay. Structure. Okay, that's good. Amber says structure. Debbie? Yeah. That's great. Yeah. Right. 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 That's good. Yep. Very good. Exactly. That's right. Well, Roger, you can chime in.
Well, routines take away give structure to things.
Yeah.
Boundaries to things.
Yeah.
And that gives comfort to them.
Yeah. Right.
When it comes down to it, we like the boundaries to know what's safe and, where we are and when we get out of bounds.
Right. Yeah.
It's a routine.
Yep.
And easier to stay in than we don't have a routine and we don't know what the boundaries are.
Yes.
And that gives us in sometimes the unknown. And
Yep.
not many of us like the unknown.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes we think we do, we think we want it, but we really do best when those are structured. You think about so many day-to-day habits that we teach this way. How many conversations do we have with our children about how to brush their teeth and why we brush their teeth? Typically, we have one or two of those, and then we just get in the habit. We brush our teeth every night. They brush theirs every night. When we tell them to, they do it because they're used to doing it. They built the habit. There comes a time when you don't even have to tell them, right? So that's building a routine. It's also teaching them about the importance just because they're carrying it out. And so we can harness that power with routine. I think that's what Deuteronomy 6 is alluding to, that we've talked about from time to time. Teach them when you go on the way, wherever you're going, you're constantly teaching. So our routines have the power to harness that everyday comfort and structure for good. How many, those of us with children at home, is it easy to get them upset and whiny if you do something different? Right? We're so used to having, this tradition at the holidays or whatever. And then it changes just a little bit this year. What I'm so used to, they're used to that. And so you harness that for good. We can do that, okay? All right, what about breaking? We establish routines. Now, let's think about kind of a corollary to that, though. How can we teach and instruct for good by breaking or changing up routines intentionally? We ever thought about that way? It's what breaking a routine or doing something slightly different from what is usual can wake them up and show them something maybe they've missed. It wakes them up, okay? That's a good thought. I like that.
And if we show them there's a positive outcome, I think that goes back to the dog.
Okay, good.
They show joy.
Right. Yeah. Good.
It says, don't bring your child to
But anger, that's right, yeah.
You can do it.
Yeah.
And they know they feel joy with the fact that
Yes. Right. Okay. Very good. Like that. Amber?
I was just saying it creates flexibility for the child to know that routine is great, but sometimes
Okay.
it always stays.
Yeah, teaching them something further down the line that'll be very helpful. Like you cannot always have it like you want it, right? Okay, good. All right, what about our own faithfulness? We've talked about that from time to time. Talked about it even tonight with the dog some. We don't need to underestimate how when they view us and participate in life with us, that is training, that is discipline, that is instruction. Any comments, more comments about that, how that connects the dots for them? I mean, they naturally want to be like us and with us. Right, you'll be teaching them one way or the other, that's right. Yep. And the easiest way to raise or train, let's say, a young boy to be able to work with the car or work with wood and build stuff is get them out there with you, right? The best way to train a young lady or young man, either way, to cook and to know how to operate a grill or whatever it is, get them out there with you. The easiest way to keep them in the dark about those things is just do it all yourself, right? I know of some whose dads were forced to be out at the car every time dad was working on it, and they resented it. So their response was, I'm never going to make my child go out there. And now their kids have to go carry their car to somebody else to get their oil changed and, depend on somebody to get their flat tire changed, that kind of thing, right? So we think about that spiritually. Our own day-to-day routines, day-to-day living, day-to-day faithfulness is a big part of their own learning, training, discipline. How do we respond when they ask us a question, when they want something, when they beg us for something? How is that playing into discipline and instruction? How do we respond when they tell us what they want or when they go after what they want? It's an important time, right? When those moments happen, they need to learn, how do I get stuff? I get stuff when I earn it, when I am responsible, when I earn privilege, earn trust. I get stuff when I listen to the rules. I get my way when I've been responsible. I don't get my way when I am irresponsible. Those kind of things, right? So our responses to what they ask, what they want, can be a big part of this. And then finally, one thing that Miss Debbie mentioned, how we treat other people. They're noticing all the time how we interact with each other. Most importantly is with our spouse. They're observing that. But just on down the pyramid, no matter the relationship, they're noticing. They'll notice how we treat strangers. They'll notice how we treat family. They'll notice how we treat waitresses and waiters. And they'll notice. And they'll be wrestling and reasoning the whole time. Why are they doing that? And hopefully we're modeling for them and training them in that right direction. Let's go back through and apply these a little bit quickly, using terminology from Deuteronomy 6 and several other Deuteronomy passages. God says your children are going to ask you why you do what you do, how you ended up here. So when they ask you, you tell them what God did. Okay? You point them back to how God led us out and God gave us the commands and God has been so good to us. All right? So just think about questions they might ask from our routines. Are we prepared? What are we doing when we do these routines? Well, they might ask, why do we worship every Sunday? Why do we pray together every night? Miss Debbie mentioned. Why do we worship on vacation? That's a routine. That's a commitment that we're constantly making, and it's going to naturally bring into their minds those questions, those reasonings that give them a chance to learn from you, but also they may ask, and then that opens up the door for that positive instruction and teaching. All right, a couple examples of changing routines. Why do we go to bed later on Wednesday night? Why do we go to bed earlier on Saturday nights? We want to raise children that think that school is most important, then we'll miss church or worship for school, right? We'll stay out as late as we can for a sporting event or a concert or whatever school event on a Saturday night leading into Sunday. But boy, when Sunday night, when 6 o'clock comes at church, we are out of here. We got to be in bed. School begins Monday. I'm not trying to be overly picky and overly negative. I'm just trying to, let's frame this so that we realize they are learning from everything we do. The routines we set, but also when are we willing to change up the routines? I mean, our bedtime is about 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes, a little later on Wednesday nights typically. It doesn't have to be. We could find a way to eat before 6 o'clock, and it would be much the same, but we just choose to eat after, so it's not even that big a deal. But instead of 8:30, it's 9 o'clock, sometimes 9:15. If they ever ask, why is Wednesday night later than Tuesday night or Thursday night? Well, because we have a commitment to the Lord. We have a commitment to the church, and we're honoring that commitment. It's the right thing to do. So that's where the breaking of routines can wake them up, can cause them to see there are things that are important and there are things that are most important. We're all going to honor God in those most important things. I might ask for our own faithfulness, why it is that we do what we do. Why do you? Okay, you read your Bible with us and you pray with us at night. Why do you invest in your own soul? Why do you do these things? It's a powerful question. Why did you decide to obey the gospel? They might ask. Why do I not get what I want every time? I want it. Why can't I get it? Why does she, but I don't, right? Well, we've got to think through how that's teaching and training. And then how they treat other people. How were you able to be nice to her? She was mean to you. How were you able to respond nicely? Why did you give that man on the side of the road some food? They're asking, even if they don't ask us verbally, they're thinking and reasoning, and that's training and teaching all along the way. All right? Any more comments about this day-to-day faithfulness living?
Sometimes I feel like he's not going to understand if I explain things.
Yeah.
But they understand when they think.
Yes, that's right.
You can show them the Bible, you can read the verse.
Yes.
And they'll get it eventually.
Right. And even if they cannot understand language yet to our proficiency, they will always understand action, right? And so as soon as they see us doing stuff and they benefit from us doing stuff and they're with us, they're learning then. Even if they're not verbally communicating and learning, they're already learning. So that's huge. That's one thing I didn't even mention, but in the dog thing, he says, they don't talk. They don't talk like humans. So I have to find a way to train them without that direct communication. Well, that's through example, through living, and through consistency, structure, all those things. All right, any last comments about the importance of day-to-day living, faithfulness, how that trains and disciplines? All right, here's the reminder of the whole, our 4 quadrants, 4 areas. It's a whole big picture, okay? Let's move to talk about correction, discipline, chastening as it was in the New King James from Hebrews 12. Correction and consequences. So just a reminder, when we talk about these things, this is not all of parenting, okay? So spanking is not a summary of our parenting. It shouldn't be that, okay? It will be a vital and necessary component, but it's not, oh, they're a great parent because they spank their kids all the time. You know, we need to be sure we're holistic in all of this. Hebrews 12. Let's read just that first couple of verses, and we'll close up, and I'll give you a quick assignment for next week. Hebrews 12, 4-6. In your struggle against sin, you have not yet resisted to the point of shedding your blood. Okay, Hebrew Christians, they're suffering because they are Christians, and he says you've not had to die for your faithfulness just yet, but it's coming, okay? Have you forgotten? Have you forgotten? So something that's written, something they should already known. Have you forgotten the exhortation that addresses you as sons? He's placing them in this relationship. You are sons to God the Father. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor be weary when reproved by him. For the Lord disciplines the one he loves and chastises every son whom he receives. So notice there, the Hebrews writer is saying, God loves you, and that means he will discipline you. He will allow pain in your life in various forms such that you are proven, in this context right here, proven to be his son, proven to be legitimate as his son. And so because you're suffering for your faith, know that does not mean God has left you, but in fact it's the opposite. God loves you and is with you. And this, if you will remain faithful to him and endure, will lead to your strength on the other side, okay? So just notice that discipline is necessary if we're going to be a son, if we're going to be a child, and notice that there is this inseparable connection between love and discipline. And he quotes from Proverbs 3. And this follows, you read verses 5 and 6. We're so familiar with that. Trust in the Lord with all your heart. lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him. He will make your paths straight. He will direct your paths. These verses follow that paragraph. Do not regard lightly. Don't forget. He said, have you forgotten, verse 5? Do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord. So we cannot regard lightly, we cannot forget that God allows our circumstances to discipline us for greater good. And as parents, we cannot regard lightly the necessity for corrective discipline in the home. We can't forget that that's an important tool that God gives when boundaries are crossed, when God is not honored. Don't be weary when reproved by him. Okay? It is painful, but we can never allow that pain to be an excuse for giving up or growing too weary. The Lord disciplines the one he loves, and he chastises every son on whom he receives. He welcomes us. He loves us. He knows us, and he still chooses to love us. And it's this discipline that causes us to grow into his sons. All right, so let's do, in the week to come, between now and next Wednesday, just do some searching, if you can, in the book of Proverbs, and let's do what the Hebrew writer does. And let's see what verses, especially from Proverbs, talk about the discipline that happens between parents and children, the discipline that happens that leads to growth. Okay? So can we take that assignment a little bit and run with it? See if you have any that stand out to you. So search Proverbs. What do you find? Verses from Proverbs that talk about discipline in the home, discipline between parents and children, or how discipline is helpful. Okay? I've got a couple of screenfuls of them that follow, but since we're out of time, we'll let you run with that too, and we'll come together next week, all right, about this. Questions or comments as we wrap up? All right. Thank you for your attention, for your comments. Great observations tonight.